Hi, my name is Elías Álvarez. I hope you are doing great. Today, I'm going to present to you the Thomas Green case, power, office politics, and a career in crisis. So, before we start analyzing the case, let me give you some context. Factor humano, organizational behavior, is broadly concerned with people, whether it is as individuals under development, management of a leader with an employee or team, or corporate culture. The Thomas Green case is a factor humano case. When is this case taught? The Thomas Green case is mainly taught in the first course of the full-time MBA. In there, you will find early career, high potential participants who resemble Thomas Green. It is also taught in the first course of the part-time MBA, where you will find mid-career top performers and managers. They resemble Green's boss, Frank Davis. But also, to enter the context, why is this taught, or why is this case important? Well, because it puts in the table a very important question, which is how to deal with conflict in organizations. In order for my exposition to be as clear as possible, I will use Professor Amy Gallo theory of conflict management as my framework. So let me begin by naming the protagonists. Those are Thomas Green, Frank Davis, and Shannon McDonald. Thomas Green is a new senior market specialist. And before achieving this position, he was an account executive. He just recently moved from Atlanta, where he was an account executive, into Boston. So he's experiencing a lot of personal changes, but also professional changes. He's a very high potential, very eager to prove himself and win person, a creative guy, but also a bit unorganized person, okay? He, and that's important, obtained the senior market specialist position thanks to a good relationship with Shannon McDonald. And in order to become a senior market specialist, just after being an account executive, he bypassed a number of people who were before him, we could say, in order for that promotion. Frank Davis, the marketing director and Thomas's boss, is a former senior market specialist and a 17-year veteran in the company. He has been here since its foundation in 1990. So for Frank Davis, Thomas wasn't his candidate for the job, so he's not a huge fan of him. He knows that Thomas doesn't have management experience. He knows that although Thomas is a smart person and a good salesman, he might not still have the skills necessary for the senior market specialist position, which is, we could say, something of a manager position. And lastly, we have Shannon McDonald, the division vice president. Prior to her position, she was national sales director. And I think this is important because she doesn't come from the marketing team as Green or Davis, but from the sales team. And therefore, that might explain why she has a liking in Thomas' job, who is a very, very good salesman. Also, Shannon has a strategy consultant experience, and that informs her decision-making and makes her look at the problem in a more holistic way instead of approaching it in every little instance. So let me give you some company and industry background. So Dynamic Displays was founded in 1990 and in 1994 began a hospitality branch. Currently, Dynamic Displays has 60% of the market share in hospitality services, and 80% of those components for the company come from the airline sector. So Dynamic Displays has around 1,500 self-service kiosks and operates in more than 75 airports. It gives to the airlines a reduced check-in cost in a range of 9.4 to 21.5 times, and is a full-service provider. So they gave maintenance, they operate, and so on and so on. For the airlines, dynamic displays is a good habilitator because the margins currently are razor thin because of because the fuel cost is rising. So costs are very important for the airline industry. And the last point in the background is the online check-in. So it has online check-in service providers have experienced a dramatic growth from 45% to 64% in the United States leisure passengers in the last year. Not only that, but cost savings for online check-in are greater than that of kiosks because passengers print the boarding passes at home and you do not have to give maintenance to a kiosk machine. So some key events are the following. First of all, Green aggressively campaigned for the senior specialist position after a week-long training session at corporate headquarters. Not only that, but he was sort of a wonder boy because he recently, just after 4 months in the account executive position, he closed a deal with a major airline. After his aggressive lobbying and the obtention of the position, thanks to Shannon, Green became subordinate to Frank. So after a month in the job, Frank and Green had a conversation in which Frank expressed criticism of Thomas's work. Not only that, but he also wrote a mail directed towards Shannon in which he writes not only the criticism, but also the corrective measures resulting from the former meeting. After that, they were scheduled to see themselves once again in mid-November, but that meeting never happened. They watched themselves, they met themselves again, only until mid-January. And it is after this meeting that Frank wrote a second email to Shannon McDonald in which he writes the following: I recommend we part ways with Thomas Green. After this, Shannon wrote a mail back to Thomas Green in which he writes the following: all of us want to improve the current situation. I look forward to resolving this issue as soon as possible. So as you can see, what became a problem of criticism of Thomas's work and maybe not being able to see themselves eye to eye towards ways of working or some objectives eventually became a problem that is sort of personal. Now, there are other facts, which I may call corollary facts. The first group of them is change and pressure. Both the company and Thomas are passing through uncertainty and big changes. The company is receiving a lot of pressure from the online check-in service providers. Thomas is experiencing the pressure of a new position, but also a new city, a new boss, and a new role. There's also pressure to maintain a market share and reach the OKRs. That might explain why Frank has very aggressive OKRs that are not that well received by Thomas. The second cluster of facts is adaptation. None of our protagonists has been in his or her role for more than a year at the beginning of the case, summer 2007. So all of them are sort of fresh in their position. And lastly, corporate support. Despite Thomas's good relationship with Shannon, he never had a coach, someone who might guide him and procure him. Not only that, but Shannon promised Thomas a coach when he began his new assignment. So those are some facts that might explain how this problem evolved into what it is today. Now, returning to Gallo's theory of conflict management, but also explaining this situation through those lenses, there are 4 main ways in which conflict can be typified. First of all is task conflict. The goal is not clear or there are disagreements about it. And as you can see, Thomas and his boss, Frank, do not agree on the OKRs. That's a task conflict. But that task conflict eventually evolves also into a process conflict because none of them have the same ways of working. They don't agree in how to do the job. Also, there's a status conflict. This one is not among Thomas and Frank, but among Frank and Shannon. At the end of the day, the person who hired Thomas for the position is Shannon, not Frank. So there's a status conflict. And lastly, all these problems degenerated into a relationship problem, into a relationship conflict. That means there is a personal issue between two or more people. In that case, a personal issue between Thomas and Frank. Now, some possible solutions. To do a good possible solution, you need to have clear goals and objectives. It should not be to only trump your counterpart or prove that his or her behavior was wrong. That won't take you anywhere. Some acceptable goals are the following: save your relationship and get done with the project as quickly as possible. So a goal is good as long as it procures the well-being of all the involved agents, right? As long as it is the best possible solution for them and it respects their dignity, it is a good solution. Now, how do those solutions become tangible? You can A, do nothing, B, address it indirectly, C, address it directly, or D, exit the relationship. So when you do nothing, you have to do it actively. Actively let the problem go. That's something that, for example, you might think that Thomas did, but that's not the case because he was gossiping with a lot of people about his boss. So he didn't let the problem go. He was just managing it by outside, not with his boss. Now, you might also think that maybe Frank addressed it indirectly when he wrote to Shannon, but he never asked for help. He's only putting Thomas in the super trooper of shame. So he's not addressing it indirectly, but I would rather say he's trying to say, Shannon, you hired a rookie, this is your problem. You could address it directly, and you might think that they did so because they had 2 meetings and they tried to look straight in the eye. But I think that they never framed the message in a correct way. They didn't manage their emotions, they didn't listen, and therefore they couldn't make their viewpoint heard. So none of them really made their viewpoint heard, their viewpoint heard, which is how a direct address of the problem should end. And lastly, this is the last resort, of course, and naturally the solution that they are yet to achieve and that they certainly do not want to achieve, but is to exit the relationship. It can mean to change of team, be laid off, resign, or sign an HR report. Nevertheless, this is very much a last resort. I think that what Frank and Thomas should do is to really address it directly by framing the message in a correct way, managing their emotions, listening to the other person, and making their viewpoint heard. All these while procuring the well-being of the other person involved. Now, it's time for the wrap-up. There are 4 steps to analyze a conflict. First, understand your counterpart. Maybe they are conflict avoidant or conflict seekers, but you have to understand it so you can better talk with them. Second, you have to identify the type of conflict. It is a personal conflict, it is a process conflict, only you know it. Third, you have to determine your goal. And this is a very important tip I give you. It should be a goal that takes into consideration the well-being of the other person. And lastly, pick your option in how to solve it. Maybe you have to do nothing. Maybe you have to address it directly, but pick an option so you can achieve a good resolution which satisfies interests, helps the people involved, and takes into account everyone's well-being. Thank you very much.